Welcome to the Word Potions podcast. I'm Chris King, and this is Strangers at Bars Sometimes Bite, Part 14. Shrill cries of anger went up, and a dangerous clamor began. Felchers that had been standing around waiting to see what would happen drew short blades. I heard shouts coming from lower floors and the thudding of boots coming up the stairs. "This is going to wake all of Magistra," hissed Lazuli. "I think it already has," I replied. A Felcher that had edged closer to one of the Elvar guards lunged forward and grabbed his gun. The Felcher wrestled the gun out of the Elvar's hand and began blindly firing into the mass of gate guards in front of him. Gunfire roared around the large cavern as gate guards returned fire and downed the rogue Felcher. As soon as the first Felcher leapt forward, 10 more jumped forward. The whole terrace dissolved into madness, wild shooting, screaming, shouting, and unheeded commands. I dropped to the floor along with Lazuli and Thurtai. Bullets whistled over our heads and ricocheted off the stone walls behind us. Thurtai whispered urgently to me and Lazuli, "You are the leader of your people. You must lead them, or we will be slaughtered up here." "Thurtai is right. You need to talk to them," I said. "Give me the Bakri's blade," said Lazuli. I unhooked the scabbard from my right side and handed it to Lazuli, trembling as the waves of malevolence cast it over me. Lazuli accepted the sword and grabbed the handle like it was an old friend. He stood up and held the sword above his head. "Stop. I command you as the High Noble to stop." Lazuli's voice echoed around the area, somehow magnified to be heard above the commotion. The gate guards on the landing watched wide-eyed as Lazuli strode between them and the Felcher still holding the blade aloft. "These Felcher are my guests. They bring us the salvation we so desperately need." Everyone had grown silent, but Lazuli's voice still echoed all around the terrace and a good deal beyond. "I hold in my hand a Felcher's blade, known as the Bakris. It is the only thing that can defeat the demon lord Baktalis. In exchange for sanctuary and this blade, these Felcher have agreed to abide by our rules. I, above all, understand your pain and your hatred for all things Felcher. They are dark, and take from us as truly as we would like to give. But not all Felcher are so. The clan Zotel Igreth has abandoned the Elvar hunting ways and have sworn loyalty to me. Together, with this blade, we will defeat the demon, break the unity of the Felcher, and take back our land as other high nobles before me have intended." Pekinus, who stood in the midst of the guards, cursed and pushed one of them forward. "Don't listen to this fool. He is not the rightful high noble." The guard, who seemed to be the captain of the squad, scrambled back to his place in line, whirling around to face the underlord. "And you are? He's the means of defeating Baktalis, and I don't want to die here today just to fulfill some fantasy of yours." The other guards nodded and mumbled words of agreement. They glared at Pekinus. Pekinus glanced around himself, wide-eyed, and turned to run down the stairs. He didn't make it 2 steps before the guards seized him and marched him up to Lazuli. "Bring him down to the High Noble's terrace. Will you deliver a message to all nobles?" "They are to meet me in the High Noble's chambers," said Lazuli. Lazuli motioned to 2 different guards. "You two, find an elder and a priest of Evelis that are willing to perform the rites of ascendancy. Tell them to meet us in the High Noble's chambers." The guards stared at Lazuli in surprise. Then one of them pushed the other, and they both turned to the stairs running, taking them 2 at a time. Thurtai turned to address his people. They waited expectantly, like children about to receive a story read by their father. Thurtai addressed them in Felcher, and after a brief monologue of screeching and strange sounds, his people began to disperse and file back into their homes. A few picked up the dead guards' weapons and curiously examined them. "Do they know how to use guns?" I asked Thurtai. "Some of my people do, but most of them don't. Felcher believe in the glory of slicing flesh with a blade or spear. It is a sign of respect to gaze into your enemy's eyes as the light of life leads them." I stared at Thurtai for a moment. He met my gaze with unwavering resolve in his yellow eyes. I swallowed and was the first to look away. I heard sounds coming from the stairs and turned to see Pekinus being dragged down them. Lazuli beckoned for me and Thurtai to follow. He led the way down to the High Noble's quarters. A sizable group of Elvar were already gathered. They gasped as Thurtai came into view. Some muttered curses, some just glared, and some nodded in acceptance. Lazuli reached the great chair that had once been occupied by Castor, and stood in front of it, raising both his hands. "Welcome. I have summoned you all here for a reason. and it is twofold. To answer your questions about what is happening with the Felcher, and for you to witness me perform the rites of ascendancy. Shocked gasps issued from around the chamber, and a clamor began as dozens of voices began discussing, debating, and dissenting. I understand the rites have not been performed in centuries. Many Elvar were not strong enough to endure such a thing. However, as the threat of Bactalis looms, the need for power is great. An older Elvar interrupted him, shouting so all could hear him. You're just trying to take all the power for yourself. The title of High Noble not enough? Now you will claim the title of Ascendant? Traditionally, the High Noble and King are two separate entities. Having both will give you too much power over the Elvar people. I would agree with you were this a normal day and age, but our people are threatened. We are at the brink of extinction, and this is a fight for our survival. I wish to remind you that I do not rule as a democratically elected official, but as a monarch, said Lazuli, as he scanned the room, seeming to meet every eye in it. Two Elvar began pushing their way through the crowd towards Lazuli, a golden-robed female and an ancient-looking Elvar holding himself up with a tall staff. The golden-robed Elvar stood before Lazuli and bowed formally, while the old Elvar gave a small tilt of the head. To him who seeks ascendancy, may the light of Evlis cleanse you and empower you with strength. I watched as the two newcomers began preparations. The Elvar in golden robes drew a series of intricately interconnected swirls and lines around the High Noble's seat. The elder pulled several bundles of herbs and spices out of his robe, a few stones, and a bowl. I remembered how Lazuli had been experimenting with Felcher magic. The backs of my palms began to sweat, and I glanced at Lazuli. From everything that I understood of the two different powers in this world, they didn't seem to be compatible. I was about to push my way towards Lazuli when the priest spoke in a loud voice. Have you darkness interfering with your light? Lazuli responded with the same tone in his voice, almost sing-song and droning. Everyone has darkness, but I wish to expose it to the light. Lazuli slipped the tip of the Bakri's blade into a notch in the floor. The tip sank a few inches in and stopped, standing straight up on its own. I present this blade as a vessel to hold my darkness. The priest nodded and continued drawing lines and circles. They grew more intricate until my brain started to hurt just from following them with my eyes. The elder stepped forward with the bowl and presented a sort of concoction to Lazuli. As your light will be cleansed, so will your body. One cannot change without the other. Lazuli accepted the bowl and turned to sit on the High Noble's seat. He held the bowl high for a moment, then drank whatever had been inside of it. A grimace passed over Lazuli's face, but it was gone just as quickly. His eyes began to glow a dull blue in the low light of the chamber. Elder, bind me to the seat. I will not leave until the deed is complete, or my soul goes to Evlis's paradise. Mutters went up from the crowd of assembled nobles and lords. The priest finished one last swirl of the chalk, then turned and sat inside of a clear circle that all the lines seemed to originate from. The elder bound Lazuli's hands to each armrest, then his chest to the backrest. Evlis, Lord of Light, may my body become a conduit that lets your light shine on the ascendant, intoned the priest. Pulses of light began to flow along the intricate lines on the floor, flowing up to the chair. Nothing happened at first, but as the pulses of light grew stronger, so did Lazuli's reaction to them. Lazuli gritted his teeth, a snarl of pain becoming etched on his face. He gripped the arms of the chair until veins began popping out of his forearms. Lazuli shuddered, then gasped. A deep fog of darkness issued out of his mouth. With each breath, more and more inky blackness oozed out. It drifted towards the blade, and as it got closer, flowed down into the gem placed unto the pommel. Lazuli's eyes started to roll back in his head, but deep black fog kept issuing out of his mouth and nose. So much darkness. It is a wonder Lazuli did not join the Felcher tribes, breathed the noble beside me. Ever so slowly, the fog grew lighter and lighter, until darkness no longer oozed out, but golden sparkling mist. This also drifted towards the blade and began to be absorbed into it. A crack formed in the gem, but slowly the blade began to lose its dark coloring, instead replaced by a golden sheen. Lazuli no longer held on to the armrests of his chair. He had slumped to the side, unable to hold himself up. His restraints held him in place, but his face had become gaunt, and his eyes seemed to sink into his skull. He lay there until not even golden light issued out of his mouth, His body lay still, unmoving. Not even his chest rose and fell. I looked around, but no one moved. My nostrils flared. "He's dead," I breathed. I pushed forward to the chair. The elder tried to bar my way, but I pushed past him easily. "No, you must not disturb the ritual." I placed my hand on Lazuli's shoulder and began to shake him. His head flopped from side to side. I gritted my teeth. "After everything I've sacrificed because of you, you cannot give up now." I reared back and slapped Lazuli across the face as hard as I could. Lazuli gasped and took a deep breath. His eyelids opened, revealing sky-blue eyes, shining with a deep intensity. With every breath that he took, strength seemed to flow back into him. With barely a tug at his bonds, Lazuli broke free, then snapped the rope around his chest. "Thank you, Hampton. You reminded me of where I'm supposed to be." Lazuli stood up, blinking bright luminescent eyes at the people around us. He raised his hands as if to gather everyone into an embrace. "My people, how glad I am to see you now." People stared in wide-eyed amazement at the person before us. His skin was perfectly smooth, not a blemish or scar marked it. Eyes held a warmth that had not previously been there, and an aura of strength and power emanated from his being. "It worked," gasped one elder. "He is ascendant," cried another. Lazuli bowed to the priest of Evlis, who seemed rejuvenated by the whole experience, then turned and pulled the Bakri's blade out of the stone. Lazuli turned to address the Elvar gathered in the chamber. "My people, we will defeat the demon that plagues us. With the light of Evlis and the strength of our unity, we will bring righteous judgment upon our enemies." A few nobles cheered, which was soon picked up by the rest. Only a few didn't follow suit. Instead, they politely clapped. "You must eat something, my son," said the elder. He held up a bowl full of algaki meat, some sort of tuber, and some lichen. Lazuli bowed and accepted the bowl. He was about to take a bite when a rumble shook the earth around us. Dust fell through the air, and a person in the distance screamed. I staggered and caught myself on one of the walls. "What was that?" I called. A guard ran in just then and angled for Lazuli. "High noble, the Felcher have returned in great numbers, the demon among them." Lazuli nodded and strode out of the chamber to the stairs. He looked out over Magistra toward the south gate. Guards ran towards the area, but Baktalis had demolished the gate just as he had done to the previous one. Lazuli gritted his teeth. "Entity of darkness, I will destroy you," he called back to the nobles. "This battle will either be our salvation or our doom. Rally your people and get into the fight. No one will come out of this unscathed, and we will need every body we have to push them back. Leave the demon to me. On me, Hampton." Lazuli jumped over the side of the terrace, not even bothering to use the stairs. He plummeted 3 floors. I watched as he landed and rolled, then sprinted toward the demon, golden Bakri's blade held high. I gaped after him. This was a totally different Lazuli than I was used to. Thurtai stood next to me, gazing after Lazuli. "I must rally my people. If we are ever to be accepted by the Elvar, we must help defend Magistra." "Wait, how will we tell you apart from the attacking force?" I questioned, because I knew in the confusion of battle, friend could be easily mistaken for foe. "We will tie strips of white cloth around our forearms and forehead, signifying our unity to the forces of light," said Thurtai as he turned away. "Very good, I will pass the word along," I said. Thurtai went up to his people, while I ran down the stairs as quickly as I could. On the ground floor of Magistra, I drew my blade. Kelzar hummed in my hand, excited at the prospect of battle. "Ready to do this?" I asked in my head. "I was born ready, Hampton." I called out to any Elvar that I saw, telling them that Whitecloth Felcher were friends, not foe. Soon, the word spread that Whitecloth Felcher were not enemies. I hoped the people wouldn't attack Thurtai's clan in the frenzy of battle, but I knew Thurtai was right. If they didn't bleed for Magistra, they wouldn't be wholly accepted. I ran towards where Lazuli and Baktalis fought. They danced around each other, exchanging blows. Lazuli's skill with the blade was evident. I wondered why he always seemed to use a pistol instead. A group of enemy Felcher ran between me and Lazuli. There were 5 of them, each one carrying a wickedly sharp-looking dagger. "To battle!" cried Gelzar in my head. The next few minutes were a blur of motion. I dodged, parried, and sliced. I killed 3, and the other 2 turned tail and ran. A burning sensation across my side alerted me to a potential wound. I glanced down and saw a clean cut through my clothes. The wound bled, but didn't seem to be too bad. I gritted my teeth and pushed on, running towards Lazuli, who still traded blows with the demon. I ran up behind Baktalis and slashed at it as hard as I could. Kilzar barely left a scratch. I parted a thin line of flesh. Baktalis didn't take his attention off Lazuli, but suddenly kicked back, hitting me in the chest, sending me flying through the air to land on my back. A hand reached down and pulled me to my feet. I tensed for a second, then recognized the white band around the Felcher's forearm. "Many thanks, brother," I said. The Felcher gave a small nod, then ran off to join the battle. I looked around myself, trying to get a better scope of the situation we were in. Citizens had cleared the area, which was now filled with gate guards, pushing towards the Felcher that streamed through the broken gate. Baktalis and Lazuli still battled, but many wounds covered the both of them. The Bakri's blade parted the flesh of Baktalis as easily as cloth, but in return, Baktalis left deep wounds on Lazuli whenever he failed to properly anticipate an attack. I spotted Thurtai coming down the stairs and hurried to meet him. "Thurtai, we need to help Lazuli. I don't think he can take this demon on his own." "It is doubtful we can do anything of consequence. We are not blessed like Lazuli." "We've got to do something," I yelled. Thurtai nodded and wrapped himself in darkness. I gripped Kilzar with both hands and charged toward Baktalis. As I got close, its tail whipped out toward me in a wide arc. I ducked underneath, allowing it to miss me by inches. I then swung my blade at its back. It didn't leave a scratch. Thurtai appeared out of darkness and stabbed his dagger into one of the demon's eyes. Baktalis roared and swatted Thurtai out of the air with a mighty swing of its arm. Thurtai spun through the air, somehow landing on his feet, but he collapsed to one knee, holding his ribs. He gasped for air and dropped his daggers. "Don't worry, Thurtai. Stay behind us. We'll take care of this demon," I said in a loud voice. I rolled to my left, avoiding the tail once more. Lazuli blocked a clawed hand, then retaliated with a slash across the demon's belly. "We need to finish him quick. He's too strong for a long drawn-out battle," I called out. "What do you think I've been trying to do?" yelled back Lazuli. I stabbed toward Baktalis, but Kilzar slid off its hide like it was metal plating. I turned just in time to see Lazuli wind back his arm and throw the Bakri's blade toward me. It whirled through the air in a golden arc before lodging point first in the stone floor at my feet. Lazuli raised both his arms above his head, and I felt a sudden drop in pressure. "Shield your eyes!" I turned my head. The whole cavern became illuminated by a golden light that was hot across my skin. Baktalis stumbled back, clawing at his eyes. Lazuli took one step forward and heaved the mini-sun at Baktalis. The ball of firelight slammed into him, and I heard its roar of agony. A burning smell permeated the cavern. To me, it was as if pure evil was being burnt. I slammed Kilzar back into its sheath, and with a mighty heave, yanked the Bakri's blade out of the stone. Baktalis was burnt badly, and it clawed at its eyes, trying to regain some sight. Its whole front was black and charred. Its eyes melted away. I took the opportunity and jumped toward the demon, spearing the Bakri's blade through its chest and into its heart. Baktalis flailed, and I lost my grip on the sword. Lazuli was right behind me, however, and with a flying kick, he sent the blade up to its hilt. The demon screamed for a second before beginning to twitch and vibrate. It fell to the floor with a loud thud and began curling in on itself. The Bakri's blade in its chest began to pulse in time with the flow of blood. Baktalis lay still in an ever-widening pool of dark ichor. It steamed and hissed, sizzling and bubbling. The acrid smoke was worse than the smell of burnt flesh. I stepped back and almost vomited. A silence descended over Magistra. Felcher and Elvar alike had been drawn to the flash of light, attention pulled by the massive display of power. A whole multitude of beings stared in awe at the fallen demon. Lazuli turned to address Elvar and Felcher standing around the cavern. His eyes had stopped glowing and his aura wasn't as permeating as before. "The demon Baktalis has been defeated. Run back to your home and never return. Any Felcher not of clan Zoltal Igreth and found without the white band will be subject to death." Lazuli raised his palm in the air, beginning to ignite another miniature sun. The Felcher screamed in panic and turned to flee. Lazuli extinguished the orb of fiery light with a groan and fell to his knees, as the Elvar gave chase and began cutting down Felcher that were too slow to escape. I scanned the area looking for Thurtai. I spotted him collapsed a few 100 feet from where he'd fallen. I ran over to him. His breathing was short and shallow. He drew quick breaths, and with each one, his eyes squeezed in pain. "It's my side," he said between short gasps for air. "I cannot breathe properly." "It's going to be all right, Thurtai. I'll get help." I ran toward the battle, shouting, "I need a doctor or a medic. I've got a wounded ally." An Elvar ran up, carrying a backpack full of things. "Combat healer Gesla here. Who's hurt?" Her plain face was set in a determined expression, and her eyes moved over me in an experienced sweep. I beckoned for her to follow me and ran back to Thurtai. She stopped running as soon as she saw Thurtai. "That's a Felcher." She drew a short blade from her side, holding in a defensive stance. "Don't hurt him. He's a friend of mine." She hesitated. Emotions passed over her face in waves. I got up and stalked toward her. "Save him, now!" I bellowed in her face, snarling at her. I grabbed her wrist faster than she could react and disarmed her with a simple twist technique. Her short blade flew through the air and clattered onto the stone floor and skidded along until it bounced into a wall and stopped. She was scared now. Her hands shook as she stepped backward, arms held up. I stepped around her, kneeling next to the Archon. I looked up into her face. "I'm not going to hurt you, and neither is Thurtai. Now please, less shaking and more healing." She swallowed and looked down at Thurtai, seeming to forget her fear. His condition drew her attention and held it. "This Felcher won't make it long. He's got 2 broken ribs, and I think it's piercing his lungs. Evlis, I can't do this. I'm still a new trainee. I'm just supposed to bandage cuts, not operate on different species." Even as she spoke, she probed Thurtai's side with a finger, gently feeling where the worst of it could be. "What do you need?" I asked. "I need my teacher, and I think we need to get him to the healing pools." I nodded and stripped off my shirt. "You're hurt," exclaimed Gesla. "No, I'm fine." I could still feel the burning line that traced itself across the side of my waist, but I ignored it. We maneuvered Thurtai just enough to get him into the shirt, and I began to drag him following Gesla. The ground around Magistra was relatively smooth, but every now and then an uneven patch of ground jostled Thurtai, causing him to let loose a groan. A little while of pulling brought us to the healing cave. A few Elvar inside gasped when I pulled Thurtai in as Gesla explained the situation. The healers let us in, but gave us disapproving stares. "I promise we will care for him, but there's nothing you can do except bring us more wounded," she said. I grunted and took off back to the field of battle, leaving the shirt underneath Lazuli. The remaining Felcher army had all been run off, killed, or captured. The battlefield was now a wide open space filled with groaning bodies. Lazuli was making his way through the field, talking with fallen Elvar, congratulating them and offering words of encouragement to ones that couldn't get up. He spotted me walking towards him and turned to greet me. A wounded Felcher lying on the ground pulled a dagger from its side and sank through the meatiest part of Lazuli's calf. Lazuli fell to one knee yelling. The Felcher tried to plunge the dagger through Lazuli again, but I was only a few paces from them. I yanked Kilzar from my side and severed the Felcher's head from its body. "Guess the battle's not yet over for them," grunted Lazuli. Lazuli raised his voice. "Execute any Felcher not wearing a white band. Round up the white bands and give them medical assistance." Several Elvar standing around the area saluted. "Can you heal yourself?" I asked. "No," replied Lazuli. "I used up too much of the energy." The adrenaline from the battle was gone, and in its place, I grew weary. I just wanted to lay down in a warm bed and sleep. "What are you going to do with Thurtai's clan?" I asked. Lazuli stopped to consider for a moment. His eyes swept over the battlefield, watching as Elvar with swords and knives waded through the bodies. They stopped every once in a while to inspect a body, then either passed on, helped it up, or struck it down with a bladed implement. Several times, a Felcher would hop up and try to take one last life, waving a knife and screeching a battle cry. The Elvar were ready. Guards with guns at the edge of the battlefield quickly dispatched the rogue fighters. They helped us and left their own people. I think it would be good for Elvar to learn to live with the Felcher. We have been too desperate for too long, and I believe that if we can learn to live together, then perhaps one day we can have peace with the rest of the Felcher kind. I nodded. That would be good, wouldn't it? How would you like to go back to Elhaven? I think I have an agreement to honor, said Lazuli. I stared for a second, then grinned. That would be great. There's someone I need to speak with. There's someone I need to check on as well, said Lazuli as he got to his feet and began limping toward the cave of healing pools. Thank you for listening to the Word Potions podcast. Tune back in next week for the next episode. If you like what you heard, consider subscribing, leaving a like, or sending us a message with your thoughts. Have a great day.